Welcome into the Autzen Audibles podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack, all three of us on the show today. Fall camp is over. August 21st at like 11:39. Fall camp ended when Dan Lanning came out of football practice, spoke with us in the media. This show is going to be all about wrapping up fall camp because for the next 4 or 5 days, we don't really see any Oregon football. We don't talk any Oregon football with them at least. They go off, they do their own thing, and then it's game week. Monday night, Dan Lanning press conference from the HDC to preview Oregon and Idaho this coming Saturday. Next Saturday, I should say. But first, guys, let's dive into probably the story of fall camp. That's the Matthew Bedford injury and the fallout from that. That is, if you're unaware what's happened, about a week and a half ago, Matthew Bedford, Erik spotted him in crutches. Hasn't been at practice now for over a week. Don't really know the exact injury other than its lower body, but he's not practicing. And that's now created a shift in what could happen with the offensive line. And that's turned into what basically all we've all focused on the last, 6 days?
Yeah. Well, and I think it also speaks to how little we're watching and how little we're seeing. And I know fans hate it when we bring this up, but like, I wish we could come in here and talk about like, oh yeah, this linebacker battle between Bryce Betcher and Devin Jackson. Like nobody on the record had said anything about that battle until that Team Out West premiered last night. And they talked about it on there. That's like, I mean, you get more from those than from practice access almost. So, but no, I mean, with the Bedford thing, I mean, I think I still don't know what we're going to see on August 31st, to be frank. I mean, I think I had felt pretty much all camp like, okay, Poncho at center is what we're going to see. Felt like Bedford at right guard was what we'd see in terms of replacing the two starters that took off. And then with Bedford out of the equation, and now with seemingly like Charlie Pickard with a little bit of momentum. And again, momentum being like, when we watch combo blocking drills, which are the only drills of substance we really get to watch on the offensive line, Pickard's playing center. Poncho's playing right guard. These are the things that we have. Listening to players talk about it, people love them Charlie Pickard. Is that just because it's a great walk-on story, or is that because he's going to be a really big part of this team? We're trying to figure that out ourselves, but I know on Monday, Matt and I had a question about like how we thought this shaked out, and we still were kind of like, probably Poncho at center, probably just move Strother up to right guard. I've now kind of opened my mind more to maybe we will see Charlie Pickard open the season at center, and maybe Poncho will play right guard.
Yeah, we have no idea. We're going to find out on August 31st. There's a lot of possibilities. I think Oregon and their offensive staff and Dan Lanning are just going to have to figure out whether or not Charlie Pickard can play at this level, because I for sure think he could play against Idaho. I don't think that's going to be much of a challenge, but they're going to have to weigh if he can play at this level. They're going to have to weigh if Nishad Strother could play at this level. I mean, Nishad Strother hasn't started a game in 16, 18 months. It was hurt the entire year last year. He got into games, but even he said at his media appearance that he was not close to 100% when he played in games last year. He was dealing with an upper body injury. So he's back to 100% now, but we have not really seen him in any game action that actually mattered. And maybe we'll see that against Idaho. And then you have to kind of think of, what are the risks of starting Poncho, which we're still not sure of. Poncho brought up last year when he was playing center that snaps were tough, snaps were difficult, which we've heard from multiple Oregon centers in the last couple of seasons. And we're still not sure exactly if he's up to the task or not up to the task of being the starting center. There's just a lot of revolving doors here, and we're not going to know who's going to do what until August 31st. And even then, it could be completely different the next week. So there are a lot of options, and I think a lot of them are viable. I think a lot of them could get the job done. But in terms of what the answer is today, I'm not sure it's going to be the same as it is next Saturday.
And that goes to the point I was going to bring up, that we could see a rotation of guys August 31st
entirely, yeah,
against Idaho. Like we might see Charlie Pickard trot out there as the starting center, and he gets 3 or 4 possessions, and And then all of a sudden they put Poncho back at center and they put Strother at guard. Or maybe it's the opposite. Strother starts and Charlie Pickard comes in. We could see Poncho at center and Charlie Pickard at right guard for all we know. I think the beauty of the schedule for the way it shapes out for Oregon is if they can't look good against Idaho because X is playing at center and Y is playing at right guard instead of the assumed starting lineup going into the year, they've got bigger problems. Like that's going to be the issue. Then it turns into figuring out, evaluating, seeing how guys respond, seeing how they develop and play. Boise State will be an uptick. That will be a game that, will push them. But again, like they should win that game even without Matthew Bedford in this game. And then Oregon State, is not what they were a year ago. And so you basically get 4 weeks in September to figure things out. And I think it's notable that, maybe this is a segue in a second, but Dan Lanning today said that Jordan James was fine. He was just a load management type day for him. He came out and said that Mikael Gardner is going to be out for a while. He was very confident when talking about Matthew Bedford playing again this season. So, in 4 weeks, he might be back. And that game down in Southern California against UCLA in late September, it wouldn't, maybe he's playing by then. And this whole worry is for nothing.
Yeah, that's possible. And I guess the thing it potentially does provide you is, well, that's just the way the season goes, is opportunity to figure out who your best center is. And I do wonder a little bit if the musical chairs part of this is trying to figure out okay, if we think Poncho is for sure one of our best five, and it really feels like talking to coaches, even how they kind of talked about him on that team out West, it feels like they think that's true. And it's just a matter of where he lands. Part of me wonders if this is more who is the bigger liability, Charlie Pickard at center or Nishad Strother at right guard? And we'll see what happens there. And I did want to spend just a second doing a small Charlie Pickard just kind of dump for people, just to kind of let you know who this guy is, because I'm sure listeners have no idea who this walk-on from Jesuit is.
It's definitely a better word to describe that rather than a dump. But,
I know. An information dump.
There you go.
Here, probably should have added another word in there. I won't be going to the bathroom for this segment. But the point I was just going to make is this is a guy who you speak to the players, they're really high on him. I know Nishad Strother said on Tuesday, he's the leader of the room. He's the backbone of the room. This is a guy who has a lot of respect. I think, has been here 3 seasons, and he's just been kind of waiting in the wings. I talked to Marcus Harper for a story I'm going to write later this week about him. And Marcus's point was, Charlie told him, I don't have to be here. I have signed no contracts. There's no actual obligations for me to be here. I'm here because I love football, and I really want to give this an opportunity to see what I can achieve. And that's the type of mindset you love to hear from these type of players. We have not spoken with Charlie. I'm imagining if he does turn out to be their day one starting center, that will change in short order. But this is a guy who clearly has the attention of his teammates and the appreciation and admiration of them. And I think it was Jared who made this point, and we've kind of probably all thought it, but in our Slack channel of could this be another Ryan Walk story? It doesn't have to be a seasons long of Charlie being the center. It could be that this is only a short-term thing, but could this be a walk-on who develops into somebody that becomes a reliable player and a player that you can kind of count on in certain situations? So I just thought we should just kind of inform fans of who Charlie is, because I do think I'm feeling, more and more open to the idea, and it kind of it's seeming more and more likely that we might see him play and maybe even start the season at center.
Yeah, the last thing I have on the situation is sneaky, maybe the biggest wrench in this entire operation is that Dave Iuli is hurt.
Yes.
And he is not a part of this guard center rotation, although he's not repped at center. It's not like he was going to play center. Him being hurt has definitely thrown a wrench into this, because that moves Nishad Strother up. And again, Nishad was a multi-year starter at East Carolina. I'm sure he's capable of handling the duties, especially during non-con. But when you get in the Big Ten schedule, I don't know what that's going to look like. And at least with Dave Iuli, he's had a good amount of reps last year and the year prior in Power 5 level football, or now Power 4 level football, where you felt a little more confident in it. And now he's hurt. Now he's not practicing. So that's just the other wrench. But I don't know. I think we'll find out soon enough. It's just this could be an issue that leads to more issues down the line if not resolved within non-conference schedule, because center quarterback exchange is arguably the most important operation on the field at any given moment. And if Oregon has a giant question mark there, that can lead to a lot of problems down the road.
Let's segue now to other guys that have missed practice. We kind of touched on it real briefly there. Maybe you missed the scare this morning.
Yeah.
Jordan James wasn't at practice, but Dan Lanning today said that was their choice, that they just pulled him off to rest him. He's probably the most important back on the team. Not saying that other guys aren't important, but he's the one established guy that's healthy. And we know that's going to be productive. Like Whittington's coming back from injury. He's back. He says he's going to play. He's healthy, but until you start playing games, you want to be safe there. Michael Gardner, Eric, what's the latest there? And then who are the other guys that have been in and out of, at least in like turfs or cleats, because we've been watching some of that.
Yeah. So, you're right. You might have missed the whole Jordan James scare, because that happened in like an hour and a half this morning, where he wasn't at practice, and then Dan was like, yeah, it's precautionary. Don't worry about it. Mikhail, it sounds like we haven't seen him for 4 straight open practices, which means basically 2 weeks. I think since the first scrimmage is the last time, like before that was the last time we'd seen him, something like that. It's been a minute.
Yeah, something like that. Maybe Tuesday last week. Maybe.
Yeah, I'd have to go back through my notes. It's been a little bit of time since we've seen him. And Dan was asked, and I think to Matt's point earlier, credit to Dan, I think he's been a little more forthcoming with injuries than he has been in the past. And maybe it's just because it's fall camp and the first team is Idaho. But he did kind of indicate like, yeah, this is not somebody who's coming back overnight. This is not somebody we'll see in short order. And you kind of just hearing that and the fact that like sometimes when guys are hurt, like we see them around the facility, and that sort of indicates like, okay, yeah, they're like at least around the team. I haven't seen Mikhail since a while, probably since around that time we were talking about last time we saw him practice. Reading between the lines, like this could be something that keeps him out for a good portion of the season, perhaps. And we'll just have to see. But this is a player who, I know, Jared, would you have had him in your 2 deep for the defensive line? Would he have been just kind of?
I don't think I did.
Yeah, he'd been in that conversation for the rotation, but not.
Yeah,
this is a name to know, but not necessarily a guy you were expecting to be a breakout.
Yeah, he's a name that's come up in interviews like, hey, Coach Tuioti, like, who's impressed you of the young guys? And he's like, oh, Michael Gardner. Like, it's names that pop up. I don't have him in the rotation. However, we've talked extensively this fall camp and last year about how Dan Lanning and his defenses, they like to rotate defensive linemen, like 40 snaps, very maximum, unless it's probably like a playoff game or a conference championship game where you have to rely on your good dudes. But he probably would have been a part of that rotation. Again, I don't know. I am not Tosh Lupoy. I'm not Tony Tuioti or Dan Lanning. But he was definitely drawing rave reviews. He had a lot of good things said about him last season in his freshman year. So you would think that the jump to his sophomore season would have led him to more rotation in games and just getting in there and getting after the quarterback. But now we won't see. So this is an opportunity for other guys like a Tione Gray, I don't know, Terrence Green, Aiden Breland, I guess. Yeah, other guys' names that we've heard at practice. So I still think the defensive line has enough depth in order to rotate enough, but it certainly doesn't help. But I wouldn't say it's no Jordan James. Like if this were flipped over and Jordan James was held out because he's out for a while, that is significantly larger news. And I know I am painstakingly saying the obvious here with Jordan James, but I'm not trying to diminish Michael Gardner's role either. But this is, if Oregon had a position to maybe drop a player who's 3rd or 4th string on the depth chart, this is probably it.
Yeah. And it's interesting we feel that way too, Jared, right? Because remember where we were at in the spring? We kind of worried about depth.
I still feel there. I still feel there.
A little bit.
I'm forfeiting my thoughts towards the general public who's made fun of me for how much I think the defensive line needs help, but we'll see.
We'll see. I mean, it's the next couple weeks they're going to have to develop it because they get to the Big Ten, and we'll see if the depth is there or not. I think they have the talent. It's just more so of do they have enough of the guys, and maybe that's where McKill Gardner was going to help, was being that seventh guy that could rotate into the game. Now you only have 6, which for 3 positions is still a lot, but it's one less. There are no other major injuries though, like that we know.
But I did want to just say, like, if we want to do cleats and trainer watch briefly, we can do that. For those who don't read our practice,
Florence is probably the big one, right?
Right, Florence is the big one, and he was actually in cleats today, but he's also was in cleats a day last week, and then he was back in trainers. And for those who don't read our practice reports regularly, credit to Jared for picking up on this. I think maybe 3 years ago, right when he started, of just like, guys in trainers, probably not full participants. Guys in cleats probably means they're doing a little bit more. Iuli trainers basically the entire fall. Wasn't even in uniform today. So that's sort of important. And to Jared's point earlier, he's not seemingly available in the short term, at least to help. Broke a bone in his foot in spring, which is kind of scary. Do
you remember what that injury was? Did we ever talk to him about that?
We did. It was 5th metatarsal, I think. So like little toe.
Yeah.
Big guy, little toe. Maybe that could get re-aggravated. We don't know that it has been, but he seemed like it was weird because at media day he was kind of like optimistic, like I'll be out there, and then he's just kind of not. Julio remains kind of one we don't have a great sense of. Dan is just
Dan said he's not ready yet.
He's not ready, but like other than that, we don't really have a great feel for it. Again, he's been in cleats a couple times, but then seemingly just shows up in trainers the next time we see him. So unless that trend starts changing, I won't expect him to play for a little bit. And then just 2 other names that we have reported on. Gary Bryant still in trainers, kind of sneakily, maybe somebody who's not going to be ready to take on a big workload early. And then Keon Ware-Hudson now fully in cleats for the last couple, which is great news because he's back to that defensive line rotation. He's certainly the most veteran returner and a guy I think you expect to be part of it.
But it goes back to the point of like, you're not trying to diminish these players because some of those are starters, but the idea is that Oregon should have recruited well enough to withstand these guys for the next couple of weeks, get through non-con, and the way the season shapes up, they've got a really soft schedule. So if you are dealing with any kind of alignment, any kind of injury, like you should be able to work through it right now. And hopefully those guys are healthy by October when the meat of the schedule arrives. Let's wrap up the show with just kind of any parting thoughts of, brain dump of information of what we've taken away from. I think the first thing to me, like, that I've noticed is like the sheer size of these guys. Like, it's notable. I've talked to 2 people that went to practice this past week, and that's the first thing that they say. The noticeable size of this group and how many of them, they look significantly bigger than we've seen in a long time. And I think it's also notable that you watch the Team Out West video, you talk to the players. I think it was Tosh that brought it up yesterday of teaching speed and the value of speed and having more of it on the team. Like that's another notable thing of just watching these guys move. They are significantly better athletes than where this program was at 3 years ago when Dan Lanning showed up. Like, we haven't seen him play a bunch of football, and we'll see how that translates, but it's very clear that this team is deeper, bigger, and faster than they've been in a while, if ever.
No, that's a good one. Under Mario, they were certainly big and strong. They weren't particularly twitchy or fast. There's been a full-time speed coach. We should note under Dan, that's been the thing they prioritized. I thought they did a good job on that Team Out West with Coach Bolton last night and kind of highlighting some of that. I think that's a good one.
That wasn't not to tangent here for a second, but that wasn't a coincidence, right? That Tosh came out Wednesday or Tuesday afternoon and kind of brought up to we can teach speed, and then that night they have the speed coach being highlighted on the Team Out West. Like, that wasn't planted, was it?
I doubt it was. I don't know. I mean,
You doubt it?
I doubt it wasn't.
Yeah,
I doubt it wasn't. No, I mean, I think all this stuff is pretty choreographed to a certain extent. Like, to things that are like more specific to the personnel, I wish I had like more stuff. We kind of talked about the offensive line stuff. I think that's been talked about plenty. I think one thing that stood out to me talking to somebody who had watched a scrimmage and been around a little bit was just how impressed they were with the secondary. I think they were talking about like, I can't tell if our receivers are not as good as we think or if our corners are just really good because there's not as much separation right now. And I was like after the first scrimmage a couple of weeks ago, but that's kind of stood out in the back of my mind of like, what a storyline that was last year against Washington of both those losses was just the inability at times to have the depth because they were dealing with injuries with Kyrie, rest in peace, and with Jaleel and a couple of other guys, but also just it seems like there's maybe more capable coverage athletes who are just a little bit better at places here. And I'll be really interested, I guess, just broadly to see what this corner rotation is going to look like. I mean, I don't think we see Jaleel early. I think Tosh yesterday kind of indicated that Cam has been kind of in and out or has been dealing with some stuff. I thought that was kind of interesting. I hadn't observed any of that myself. But just like what this rotation looks like, who the key players are, and just how good they are. And I know there probably won't be a big test until maybe Ohio State in terms of just like really what this looks like because you look at the teams really on the schedule. I don't see elite receiver talent, but I'm really kind of coming out of camp thinking like this could be a place where they really upgraded.
Oh yeah, 100%. That was one of my like kind of key points. I just feel like the secondary is so much more improved, and you kind of heard that from, last year. And shout out to James Crepio, the Oregonian. Last year, James always asked about dime packages to Dan and to Tosh Lupoy, and there were no real concrete answers. It was just kind of like, yeah, no, that's kind of something that we want to install. And it's very clear that the secondary this year, because of the depth and because of the talent and their comfortable, like their comfort level with the secondary and their talent, they're installing dime. And Tosh ran through a whole bunch of different packages yesterday in his press conference, which were intriguing.
He teased the new one that we're going to see game 1.
Yeah, whatever that would be. But they're intriguing, and then I went in depth on all of them and like trying to figure out what he meant by dime rabbit, nickel rabbit, bear, all of these other raptors, all this other stuff, and you're like, yeah, they couldn't really do that last year. Like they just didn't have the guys, and like Erik mentioned, for a lot of the season, Jaleel and Kyrie were up and down. They were healthy, and then 17 snaps into the game, they both weren't. They come back in, so I think that's going to be interesting to see what the defense kind of does with the secondary, with the improved out there. But I think overall, my biggest storyline takeaway has been how the kids have talked about competition, which has been it's been different than other years. Like every year, everybody's like, "Oh, the competition is great." It's like, what do you want them to say? It's shitty. Like, no, of course not. Like they're going to try to promote their teammates and everything, but you got guys coming in from like Jabbar Muhammad coming in from Washington. You got guys like Cam Alexander who played on a UTSA team that won 10 games last year. Yeah. Like they're all talking about how different the competition is and how much that's improving them. And then kind of goes to the 2-spot thing where you get 117 people on the field and they're all practicing at once. Like, yeah, I get that. But that certainly helps the development as well. I think that the competition level, a lot of years we talk about how we wish we were able to watch practice. This is by far the biggest year that I wish I could watch practice because you have legitimate dudes all over the field going against each other daily and every single rep and every single drill. And I'll be honest, you could kind of see that today during mod bracket. That was full speed today. Not that it hasn't really been full speed, but today was like, oh yeah, there's a game week next week. And Jay Harris and Noah Whittington destroyed 2 defensive backs today. Just absolutely flattened them, threw them on the ground, while Peyton Woodyard and Aaron Flowers made 2 terrific tackles at the line of scrimmage, basically. And it was wasn't thud mode. This was basically full tackle to the ground, even though it should have been thud mode. And so I think the competition level of this team, at least in practice, it's got to be just something different than what we've seen the last few years. And I'm very excited to see what that looks like on the field against Idaho, but especially against the Michigans, the Ohio States, the Wisconsins, the whoever you want to play. But once it comes to conference play, I'm very excited to see that.
I wanted to bring up, I know Jared kind of mocked at the two-spot practice thing, but I thought it was interesting that a lot of the newcomers, the portal guys, they've all talked about like how physical or how intense practice has been here compared to their previous schools. And obviously, like, yeah, everything here is going to be awesome because this is the place that they're at. But like to a degree, though, like every newcomer that's a portal guy basically talked about something like that, of just how practice is done differently here than at their previous stop, and that they feel better prepared. I think it was Brandon Johnson that's, never really practiced in the afternoon. And I'm happy we're done practicing, or maybe that was Dante Moore, one of the two. But
It was Dante, yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know. I think, we see the Team Out West videos and Dan preaching about how you have to be physical and it starts now. And like you get the sense that the team has bought into that idea because of the newcomers, portal guys have talked about how intense and different it is here than at previous stops. And that to me, that matters.
I think those are good observations, especially because we'll take their word for it. We don't have a whole lot of evidence one way or the other. And
right.
Like we'll just, I assume they're being honest. And to Matt's point, of course, like I just remember Evan Stewart's first press thing. He was like, everything's better here than at Texas A&M. I'm like,
yeah. Well, that's at any Evan Stewart press conference. He talks about how bad the quarterbacks were at A&M.
Every time you talk to Evan Stewart, he wants to talk about how bad things were in College Station. It seems like, but you understand there's a part of that. But I also do. It feels genuine when you hear them talk about how physical it is, and I do think, like, not to spend too much time because we're wrapping on the 2-spot thing, but just for listeners who aren't familiar, basically they're able to do the same drill in 2 fields now because they feel confident with their depth from a coaching perspective and from a player perspective. And a lot of players have talked about how, like, that should be really good for player development. That should, and the coaches too have talked about that, how it should be good for just kind of getting the team well-rounded, getting everybody opportunities to practice, as opposed to, hey, we're doing this drill, 80 guys are watching. Now it's, we're doing this drill and maybe only 40 guys are watching.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be it for us on the show, unless either of you guys have parting thoughts that we haven't mentioned already. And now's the time to say it, or forever hold your peace.
We have a great host. We have a great guest on the podcast coming on Friday. That'll be fun to listen to. I don't have anything else for this because I think we've kind of cleared the brains here. I don't have a whole lot else.
I'll just end it on a question for you guys. Who has been the press conference MVP? Meaning either it could be their interview, or who was mentioned the most, or who has the most helium, or who is the most like, yeah, that's stupid. I don't believe you at all.
Oh, that's a good one, Jared. I'm trying to think here who's gotten a lot of hype. Well, like early in camp, it felt like Jaden Lamar's name kept popping up. Justice Lowe's name keeps popping up. We don't really, I think we've interviewed Justice, but not Jaden. In terms of like the interviews that have really been impressive, like maybe it's not everything that's been said, but Dante Moore just seems like he has the right attitude, which is, I think, a thing I've been tracking of, like, this is a former 5-star recruit who came in here. He knows he's not starting. Yep. And it just seems like he's, and this is a guy who was a starter last year at UCLA. Like he has every right to feel like he belongs on that field. And yet he seems really comfortable kind of being in the background this year, learning from everybody, and has seemingly the right attitude. Like we see him walk through every morning and he has a smile on his face and seems like he's in great kind of standing with the team. So I think that's just one that, from a person who spoke, that stands out. And I'm sure there's others. I was just curious to see kind of what his demeanor would be like. And I think we've spoken with him 3 or 4 times since he arrived in spring. And every time he's kind of said the right stuff, which has stood out to me.
The most recent interview we had with Will Stein, I walked away being like, A, that was insightful and good, but B, he's also kind of mastered the head coach not giving away speech already, in terms of preparing himself for whenever the time comes. Because James and a couple of people have asked him questions, and sometimes the younger assistant or the less experienced assistant maybe divulges a little too much. But it was like buttoned up head coach speak all the way through with Stein. But my favorite interview, I think, is every time during fall camp is Erik Terry, because he doesn't bullshit you, but he also has the ability to rah and fire you up about every single guy, which is pretty fun to hear.
Erik's great. Yeah, I like that one.
I do love talking to Erik. I think the most helium has to be just as low. Because he was mentioned in almost any receiver that talked. Obviously, Junior Adams would talk about him, but
even
quarterback.
Even Drew Maringer just popped, just kind of threw his name out. He's been good.
Yeah. So that's the highest helium. I think that award belonged to Kyler Casper last year. And
is that a good thing to be the highest helium?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It belonged to Kyler Casper last year, who had 1 catch, I think 8 yards, something like that. One of my bigger takeaways, and I take this very, very, very seriously sometimes. Derek Harmon is one of the people I would least likely want to see in like a dark alleyway on the team. I feel like he would just beat the crap out of almost anybody on earth. And that's what I want in my defensive tackle. So I'm very excited to watch him play because there's a lot of guys who have talked about him too as just like an absolute game wrecker. And I can see that. I think he takes things very, very seriously on the field and off the field. So that was one of the things I took away from this fall camp.
Pretty good. All right, it's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. Look forward to Friday's episode. And then it's game week. We're here. We'll have full coverage of Dan Lanning's Monday evening press conference. We'll do a mailbag Monday morning. And then you'll get back to your regularly programmed schedule where we've got basically a podcast every day almost during game weeks. So buckle up. It's here. Until the next one, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.